It's July. The tomatoes are wilting. You've already dragged the hose across the yard twice today, and you'll do it again before dark. The soil is dry an inch down. You scratched in fertilizer 2 weeks ago, and the leaves still look tired. You're doing everything right. Everything the bags and the gardening channels tell you to do. And somehow the garden still needs you every single morning like it can't survive a weekend without you. That's not a coincidence. That's a design. There's a method that's been sitting in plain sight for decades, buried, literally, in the ground, that produces harvests for 20 years without irrigation, without fertilizer, without the weekly ritual of amendments and additives that the garden center has trained you to believe is just what growing things requires. It's called hugelkultur. And the reason you probably haven't heard of it in any detail isn't because it's obscure. It's because a garden that doesn't need anything doesn't buy anything either. I'll be straight with you about where I'm standing on this. I think modern gardening has been quietly rebuilt into a subscription service. You buy the seeds, then the fertilizer, then the irrigation timer, then the pesticides. And if you stop paying, if you stop amending and watering and supplementing on schedule, the garden dies. That's not an accident. That's a system optimized for your return visit to the garden center, not for your soil's ability to sustain itself. A garden that feeds itself for 20 years is a garden that buys nothing for 20 years. I've tried to follow the evidence honestly, but you should know where I'm standing. Born in the Austrian Alps, steep terrain, short growing seasons, frost arriving early and leaving late, a farmer named Sepp Holzer started burying wood, not in a greenhouse, not with imported topsoil, on open mountain slopes at altitude where his neighbors were struggling to grow grass. He grew lemons, kiwis, grapes, figs, citrus trees standing heavy with fruit in the snow, no irrigation, no synthetic fertilizer. For 2 decades, those beds produced harvest after harvest, while neighboring fields dried out in drought years and froze in late frosts. The agricultural inspectors showed up with fine books. They handed him violations, sometimes dozens in a single year, for the ponds he dug, the mounds he built, the terraces that didn't follow approved patterns. He paid them, then kept building. By the end, the inspectors came back with cameras. Now here's the pushback I'd expect right about now. That's the Alps. That's one guy. Anecdote isn't data. Fair. So let's go underneath the mound. I was at a petrol station a few weeks back, just filling up, completely ordinary Saturday morning, not thinking about any of this. And the thing I'd been circling in my research for days finally landed in a way it hadn't when I was actually sitting at my desk reading it. We didn't stop burying wood because it stopped working. We stopped because a tractor can't drive over a hill. I sat in the car for a few minutes before I drove anywhere. Before the 1920s, fields weren't flat. In the Alps and across much of rural Europe, mounded earth was standard practice. Families built hills from buried wood and fed themselves through droughts and famines that broke entire nations. Then the machines arrived. Tractors and harvesters demanded a uniform surface, no bumps, no mounds, nothing that could slow a steel wheel or jam a plow. Agricultural boards enforced the new standard. Fields were scraped level, brush was burned. The landscape was reworked to suit the machine, not the root. The mounds disappeared, and with them, their hidden reservoirs of water and heat and slow fertility. What remained was a blank canvas, easy for machines, hungry for fertilizer, dependent on irrigation, ready for the subscription to begin. Before I go further, let me explain something. There's a reason people try this and fail. It's called the nitrogen trap. And if you don't understand it going in, it will make you think the whole method is broken when the problem is actually one missing layer. When wood first begins to decay, the microbes doing the work are hungry for nitrogen, intensely hungry. If you bury logs and cover them with topsoil and plant immediately, those microbes will pull nitrogen directly from your soil to fuel their work. Your plants turn yellow. Growth stalls. You blame the method. The fix is simple but non-negotiable. Before the topsoil goes on, pack every gap in the wood with nitrogen-rich greens, grass clippings, fresh manure, compost. You're feeding the decomposition process so it doesn't feed on your garden. Skip that layer and the mound works against you in year 1. Add it, and the mound starts working for you by year 2. Tita, the reason this matters here is that the nitrogen trap is the only real obstacle between you and a bed that runs itself. Clear it once and you don't come back to it. Now, the physics. Wood is made of lignin, and lignin, as it decays, doesn't disappear. It opens. The cell walls break down into a labyrinth of microscopic pores and tunnels. Laboratory tests on heavily decomposed pine logs show moisture absorption of over 500% of their dry weight. 500%. Drive a moisture probe into a hugelkultur bed in the middle of a July drought. Neighboring soil reads bone dry. The mound reads 40 to 60% moisture. While your neighbor is running hoses day and night, the buried logs below are releasing water slowly and steadily to the roots above. A hidden reservoir, recharged by every passing storm, were drawn down across the dry months. That's not theory. That's the physics of lignin and decay working in service of the soil. If you're half listening to this while doing something else, I need you to come back for this next part, because this is the piece that makes everything else make sense. The buried wood doesn't just hold water, it produces heat. As microbes and fungi break down the logs, the process is exothermic. It generates warmth from the inside out. In an alpine winter, the ground above a buried log runs several degrees warmer than the surrounding air. Seeds germinate earlier. Late frosts pass over without damage. The growing season extends weeks beyond what the bare ground around it allows. And then, over years, over decades, the decaying wood releases nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, not in a single flush that washes out with the first heavy rain. Slowly, steadily, matched to the pace of plant growth above it. Hardwood takes 20 years to fully break down. 20 years of automatic calibrated feeding from a foundation you built once. Here's what I keep sitting with after going deep into this. The wood doesn't feed your garden. It feeds your garden's garden. What I mean is this. As the logs decay, they don't just release nutrients directly to your plants. They build a scaffold for life. Fungi thread through the fibers and form networks that carry minerals from deep in the mound to the surface roots. Bacteria break complex compounds into forms roots can absorb. Earthworms tunnel through the softening wood and leave behind castings richer than almost anything you can buy in a bag. Where you're not just building a raised bed, you're building an ecosystem. And an ecosystem, once established, doesn't need you to sustain it. It sustains itself, quietly, automatically, for 2 decades. That's the thing the fertilizer bag can't offer you. Every bag is a transaction. You pay, the soil performs, you pay again next spring. The soil never learns to feed itself because it was never given a reason to. A hugelkultur bed is the opposite of that model entirely. Gardeners who built these beds report packing away the hose in year 2. A woman who built her first mound with storm-felled maple logs and grass clippings found her soil staying moist through August without a drop of supplemental irrigation. Her water bill dropped so sharply the city sent a notice asking if her meter was broken. A homeowner tracking every dollar found his first-year harvest was the largest he'd ever grown, and the savings on fertilizer and water covered his seed order twice over. These aren't outliers. They're what happens when soil is given a reason to work. If you're the kind of person who's serious enough about your garden to question the system that sold you your last bag of fertilizer, save this video. Not because of what I said today, but because of what happens the first dry July after you build one of these beds. You'll want to come back to the part about the nitrogen layer. There's a question this raises that I haven't fully resolved, and I want to be honest about that. How much of what gets taught as best practice in gardening is actually best practice? And how much of it is the accumulated habit of a system that was optimized for selling inputs rather than building soil? I don't know how far that thread goes. I think it deserves its own video. I'm not ready to say yet. If that question is sitting with you right now, subscribe. Not for more gardening content. For the kind of gardening content that treats your soil as something worth understanding rather than something worth servicing. That's what this channel is for. What I can tell you is where I land right now. The next time a branch comes down in your yard, before you drag it to the burn pile, think about what's sitting underneath your feet and what 20 years of slow decay could build there, not just for your garden, for whoever gardens here after you. I almost wish I hadn't gone this deep into the lignin data, because once you start seeing a flat lawn as a mist reservoir, once you understand what's sitting in your brush pile every autumn, you can't go back to the version of gardening where burning it made sense. You're stuck with this now, just like I am. There's one thing this video couldn't answer, and I want to name it directly. What else grows differently when the soil is doing the feeding instead of you? The yield data I found hints at something beyond just water retention. Something about the microbial diversity in a mound that's been running for a decade versus one that's just been built. That's a different video. I'm already working on it. Here's what I want to know from you. What's the one gardening rule you followed faithfully for years, faithfully every season, that you now suspect was never about your garden at all? Write it below. I'll be in there reading every one.